Hey, this is Zach.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exoterra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exoterra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exoterra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exoterra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exoterra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Hello, everybody. Welcome to what I believe is episode 47 of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Clint is here. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, buddy. How about you?
Fantastic. We are in the midst of the polar vortex here.
Yes.
It was a balmy 9 degrees, I think, this morning when I went out to my car. So I actually had to move snakes out of the infamous corner. My Govee alarms were going off. I have them set at 38 degrees, and this is the first time that they went off. I was like, damn, that's cold. So I got up at like 4:45 in the morning and ran down and moved 35 tubs to the middle of my garage. So
I ran into the exact same thing, buddy. I had, we've got the two cool down rooms that we pump air in from outside, but it kicked the fan off whenever, it hits a certain temp. But even with kicking the air off, I came in the other morning and same temp, 38 degrees is what one of those rooms was down to. Luckily, that was the Asian room. So I'm like, they can handle it. We're good. But had to start cracking doors open every now and then just to make sure that it'll bring it back up to about the 50 range where I'm looking to keep it. But it's rough out there right now.
I invested in the more expensive Govees, the ones that I can connect to the Wi-Fi in my house, so I can be anywhere and check them. And I can honestly say that at the time I was like, is this thing really worth $50? And it was worth $50. So my ass has been saved. But our guest tonight is one that we have had a lot of listeners reach out and ask us to try to get on the show. We're thrilled to death to have him. We have John Michels with Black Pearl Reptiles, and the episode tonight is all things dry marking. So if you're into dry marking, you like Cribos, Indigos, this is definitely going to be a fun one for y'all. But before we get into that, we have some announcements tonight. The science section, we're not talking about a journal article. We're talking about an opportunity for people. So I'll get to that in a minute. But before we get to the market intro, science intro, we need to talk about the fact that we now have our first sponsor. And I can't believe who our first sponsor is. So Clint is the guy behind the scenes that made this one happen. So Clint, why don't you tell our listeners who's sponsoring the show? And before we go there, totally endorse them 100%. So
no, absolutely. And I'll tell you, hopefully, as long as we got everything done in time, you guys already know who the sponsor is because you would have heard it at the beginning of this episode whenever it rolled out. If we've screwed up and we didn't get it done in time, you'll hear it on the next episode.
There you go.
But we are very, very proud to announce that Exoterra is now a sponsor for CCR. And I really wanted to take a moment to talk about how that came about. And you spoke to one of the representatives at Tinley. The last Tinley we were at came up and chatted because he's a big fan of the show. And a few weeks ago, it reached out. And I think it was after the episode in which we talked about the study that you're going to be doing with the hognose. And so he reached out and, said that that Exoterra really would like to get involved with that. Wanted to help out, Zach with what we're doing, with what he's doing out there. That, and they wanted to really be a bigger part of the show. So we talked about sponsorship, and one of the things that Zach and I both were big on and wanted to make sure everyone was in agreement with was anyone that we're going to talk about, we have to fully believe in, which yes. Exoterra, we absolutely do. And part of what we're going to be doing is Exoterra is going to have some new products coming out, over the course of the year. And they are going to want us to test them, to try them, to see what we think and talk about them, on the show. And I said, just know going into it that anything that Zach and I, if we're going to discuss and say things about a product, we have to have it. We have to be using it. We have to believe in it. There's going to be nothing that we're going to make sure our integrity stays intact. Right?
Oh, hell yeah.
And what I absolutely loved was during that discussion, the representative says, and that's exactly why we wanted to come to you guys, because we want that. We want the real opinion from those who are respected, on giving the truth. And that really made me feel good. I mean, it made me feel good about the sponsorship and the partnership. So I'm excited. Zach, I think you're excited.
Oh, I'm excited.
We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that hognose snake study. You guys can't see it. Maybe you'll see it one day on our live show. But literally 18 inches behind my right shoulder is a Exoterra low, large or medium. I don't know the exact size, but that's the cage or the enclosure that I put the sand in and decked it out, trying to make a biotope for the hognose snakes just for fun. And then ended up like watching them in there, and the height and everything was just kind of perfect. So the fact that like that study is now getting support and it's helping out the school and everything else, that's nothing but awesome. So absolutely. I look forward to doing this. And the people that like to keep naturalistic enclosures, definitely, stay tuned, because that's what we plan on testing. And on that front, I have it on our outline, but I just might as well jump into it. The university, my students here, the 10 of them that are helping me, we call it Team Heterodon. I keep it as nerdy as can be. We actually meet on Wednesdays at 4:00, and they're out getting journal articles right now. And we start our first captive study on February 1st. And if you're listening, don't know when this will drop, but it's it's January 17th today. So where we literally had the meetings today about where the enclosure is going to go, how we're going to set up this study. I was even thinking about the possibility, just for those of people that listen that are like, I want to be able to document behavior in the snakes I'm watching. It's called an ethogram. We may do a real nerdy episode one day. We embrace nerdiness here, by the way.
I love my nerd.
Yes. We don't run away from that. But we may actually talk about like how you can do that, because I think if if you learn how to track behaviors in a kind of logical, scientific way, it makes keeping these things so much more fun, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do about like, I'm a scientist in my ivory tower. I just like doing it because it makes them more interesting, and I can see patterns and trends. And I know if my husbandry practice is, if the animals are actually using it, or if I think they're using it, like I want to actually get in on that. So that might be something we do in the future. But yeah. So that's our announcement. We have another announcement. I'm proud of this announcement. I feel like an old ass man walking up hills, mother blanking Facebook, but damn it, we did it.
We saved it. We saved the day.
We do not need to delete the original page. It took getting on the computer to change a password, to then get on my phone, to then log in, to then add Clint. Like it was way too difficult. And I know that I'm showing my age because, but we made a Facebook post about this today. And our good friend of the show, Jason Hood, was like, would have taken you 30 seconds if you had a college kid help you. This is a fun fact. I reached out to those college kids. We have now matriculated out to where the 5 to 8 Gen Zers, I was like, hey, get in here and help me, please. They were like, I don't know anything about Facebook. It's not TikTok. So, I was like, son of a bitch. so anyway, but 2 old farts did it. So that's what matters.
Right.
So the page has been saved. So yeah.
We made it. And guys, expect that page to get a lot more active and a lot more interactive. I know we're always asking about ideas and recommendations and things like that. Now we have this, place where both eyes, get on it as far as myself and Zach. It's if you get 2 replies or something, please forgive us because, it's going to be both of us looking at this and talking. But now at least there's a more centralized place for us to be able to communicate with everyone. And I will ask, please, if you haven't liked the page yet, go up and do it because we will be posting some questions on there that we do need feedback. We do want to hear what you guys think and help us guide the show in the direction you want it. So it's good stuff, man. I'm really glad that we got that taken care of.
Yeah. And it's really weird when I submitted 2 journal articles this week and the pinnacle of achievement was getting you added as a damn admin to the Facebook page. So there's that. Anyway.
That was good stuff.
So, that's our 2, fun announcements. So you want to head on into, I don't really have anything new. We're in the dead of winter other than the collection potentially freezing to death and saving it. That's basically all that's happened since we recorded with Kayla for me.
Yeah, it's same on my end. It's, we're still in brumation. It's figuring out when I want to bring them up. And I'm just kind of dreading having to take the time to sit down and list out all the pairings and what's going to go to what and all that fun stuff. Once it starts pairing, that's fun. But it's, to sit down and plan it, it's just, oh, man, that's going to take some time. But it's just projects and things like that around here. Other than, I think from now until the first week of April or second, I think I'm booked for 9 shows.
Holy hell!
So yeah, it's about to get hectic. But I'll chat more about that in a minute. With the
market section.
But yeah, it's going to be busy.
I will say one thing about the vortex that's hitting the central and eastern part of the country. It is actually an opportunity. So here at the university, I try not to hide things. And I'm about to say this, and people are going to completely overreact. So please don't overreact. But we have a couple enclosures, and we have one rack where we just seem to always be battling mites in those enclosures. We'll use no pest strips. We'll use permethrin. Back when we had it, we would use the spray on the frontline spray on the snakes, do husbandry changes, wipe everything down, and then it would dry out in there, and then somehow mites would show up. And it's not like these animals were infested with mites, but they were getting mites. And this does actually provide an opportunity to a herpetoculturalist because with those enclosures, I told my keeping staff here, I was like, okay, it's going to be getting cold and it's staying cold. So why don't we come up with some temporary enclosures and anything that had mites in it this year, I want it outside in the cold for the duration of the cold. Now, Ophionicis, the snake mite, there is some data that shows they can survive freezing, but freezing at 0 for day after day after day after day, that's kind of difficult for things to survive. So you can't say with 100% confidence, they're gone now, but you definitely realistically are almost certainly going to knock back a large number. And what I think is happening in these is we've got the stupid little spaces where the PVC kind of come together and they get down in there, they lay their eggs, and then the damn eggs sit there down in a state of diapause until conditions get good again, and then they hatch. And because the mites are parthenogenic, you get 5 to 10 of them actually make it onto the snake. If they reproduce parthenogenically, now we've got 50, 100, 200, 400, and the next thing you know, you've got a little mite outbreak. So we are using the cold, and maybe you are a listener and you're like, didn't think about that. But you might want to if you get these opportunities, put the snakes in some temporary housing if you can, and just shove the enclosures out into the cold and let them freeze. And that's literally what we're doing. We got them protected under a awning, but we put the one rack is out there that gave us fits, and then these 6 enclosures that I use here in the office. That it just seems like you look on the damn snakes, and it's never like an infestation, but there's like 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. So that's something you can use with the cold and use the cold to your advantage. So
absolutely,
thought I'd throw that out there. All right, let's do the market and science update. So you do market, I'll do science, then we'll hop into the snakes. How about that?
Okay, good. Because I didn't want to do science.
All right, cool.
I'd rather do the market one.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. So just a few little pieces here, guys. One, again, from a personal side here, trends are continuing just as expected. I don't even want to call it a lull because I'm not really sensing a lull. I want to say that animal sales have slowed slightly compared to, again, what we were experiencing with Christmas and whatnot. We just did a show in Indianapolis, the Midwest Reptile Show, this past Sunday, and it was decent. I mean, wasn't our best show by any means, but wasn't our worst. And that, again, was as expected. I will say, as I just mentioned, we've got about 9 shows scheduled up through the second week of April. And the reason is because in about another 2 weeks is when tax checks will begin. And you'll see a market jump take place with that disposable income filtering in. So follow that along. If you are if you're a breeder who does have animals that you're looking to send to a new home, be ready to ride that wave. Make sure that you have them placed in whether it's your website, whether you are signed up for shows or it's Morph Market. Make sure that you've got them visible because there will be buyers coming. They're already out there, but there will be more coming soon. Speaking of Morph Market, I do want to kind of give a little bit of data here. So here's the overall snake market right now as far as what is posted on Morph Market. So there are currently 57,588 snakes listed for sale on Morph Market.
Lord.
As of right now. And here's the thing. 45,118 of those are ball pythons.
Huh. So
that makes up 78.3% of all snakes listed on Morph Market right now are ball pythons. The all other pythons, 2,522, so 4.4%. All boas, 5,621, that's 9.8%. And here's the thing that makes me smile for those of us who enjoy this particular side of the hobby or this particular sect. Colubrids, all colubrids, 4,327. So colubrids as a whole only make up 7.5% of the available snakes on Morph Market. And just for giggles here, out of that 4,300, nearly 2,000 of those are corn snakes. Yeah, corn snakes make up 44.5% of all the colubrids that are for sale on Morph Market. So the reason I share that is because when you back that out, right, whenever you really think about the colubrid market, when you think about the number of species that are lumped into that word, colubrid, when it comes to that market there, that's why we don't really feel a market slow, right? That's why we don't feel anything, because as we discussed before about the demand is really the same, but in certain categories there's a surplus. In colubrids, there's not. Maybe a little bit in corns, okay, but and when you think about the huge variety of corn snakes that there are, I mean, there's really tons and tons of morphs and mutations. So naturally, there's going to be a lot of those on there. But that's really promising. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's it's less than one snake per person that goes onto Morph Market, buyers on a day. So that's really cool. I thought that was, some interesting information. The other final piece, that just because I know it's kind of the hot topic if you're on Facebook and following anything on Morph Market, auctions. Morph Market has started to test out auctions. And there's, you got half of the people that love the idea and are loving it. You got half that, are upset and irritated and, feel that it's lowering pricing on animals. And I can understand where everyone's sitting, both sides. Mm-hmm. Personally, though, I would say that auctions, they have a place because in a way it's going to tell you the value of an animal. Yeah. That's going to be the truth. I personally have not put any up for auction yet, but I have won one. So, I did participate. And now I will say the value of that animal, if we're basing it off of an auction, it will change with when the auction takes place. So for example, you have XYZ snake placed for auction right now. I can almost guarantee it will probably go for a lower amount than it will in 6 weeks. And that goes back to what we were just talking about. There will be more disposable income in the population. Tax season. Exactly. And so naturally, bids will go a little higher. Snakes will go for a little bit more, on the auctions. Again, and I know it sounds like I'm beating up a certain segment, and I promise that's not the case. But those that are having the more negative impact from an auction are the ball python market. But that's really because just about all auctions right now are ball pythons on Morph Market. So you can see where, but that's, again, there's been complaints from that market, all year. And I understand why. I mean, it's when things slow down, that's kind of sucks if you're banking on a certain level of income, I guess. But all in, auctions aren't bad, especially when they are controlled to the degree that I think Darian's doing right now, where he's really limiting. I think it's down to two auctions that a person can do in a month time frame. So it's, if it is flooded with auctions, that means it's flooded with surplus animals, not that there's one person abusing the auction system, if that makes sense. So, so I think it's not a bad idea to test out. I think, it's something that we'll watch. We'll see what happens. And, if you haven't checked it out already, I recommend you do so. If you, I can tell you, if there's an animal that's listed you like, you may get it at a pretty good price. So check it out.
There you go. I haven't looked into the auctions yet. I'm going to probably look into that this week. I saw them and I saw people discussing them. I'll be diplomatic, but I didn't go on because like you said, they were ball pythons, and I think ball pythons are pretty. I don't know anything about ball pythons, so I just kind of went onward. And for the record, we're not dogging them. They're not my cup of tea. No, just absolutely. Like for some people, weird South American snakes aren't their cup of tea. So, different strokes for different folks.
100%. And, and to Darian's credit, Darian reached out and asked if I had seen any slowdown in inquiries on snakes that I had posted on Morph Market. And I let him know, no, I didn't. I've not noticed any, slowdown on the number of people contacting me for animals, I think. But I say at the same time, very few things that I have on Morph Market are ball pythons, and it feels like that's where the auctions are going to, affect any piece of it. So good things. I can tell you, it's still hopping for me.
All righty. Okay, science update's different. We're not actually talking about a journal article. We're talking about an opportunity, and it will be discussed pretty much in the next upcoming episodes until the event actually occurs, which is in June. So you will be hearing about this in perpetuity. So those of you that listened to the episodes in midsummer, I can't remember exactly who the guest was back then, But I talked about the fact that I went to my first International Herpetological Symposium meeting, IHS as it's referred to. This is a wonderful organization because it actually is a scientific organization that had its roots in herpetoculture. So if you go to the Daytona show is a direct result of IHS, because IHS used to be the meeting where you would get the zoo people, the herpetoculturalists, think Philippe de Vaugelet type herpetoculturalists, and some herpetologists, and they would kind of meet up and they would discuss what they were finding. They would, write their stuff up in the scientific way. It was a meeting, but then go back to the hotel rooms, and in hotel rooms we have this bartering system, and that's where you were actually doing the swap of the snakes. And IHS kind of got away from that because they got a little bit more conservation minded. And when you get conservation minded, selling snakes in hotel rooms isn't exactly what conservationists think of doing. So that's when it kind of split away. And then we get the Orlando show, which then became Daytona. And then Daytona, of course, ruled through the 90s. And then the NARBCs sprout off from that. So there's kind of a really cool history here. But the president of IHS is Mike Clarkson, who we will be having on in the next upcoming months. So if you like aquatic snakes, like elephant trunk snakes, tentacled snakes, the homolopsids, if you know what those are, that's what Mike's specialty is. But Mike's the president, and I've been trying to find a place to take all the science I'm doing with my students and present it. And you can't really do that in a traditional herpetology for the sake of herpetology type meeting. And IHS was literally like round hole, put the round peg in it, perfect relationship. But then I kind of, I got to thinking it'd be really, really cool if there was a day of IHS where there was a focus on herpetoculture advancement, and then keeping kind of these weird oddball species and giving people a platform to present this. And so I talked with Mike. I also talked to Roy Blodgett and Phil from Project Herpetoculture. Anybody that knows me knows I absolutely fanboy the hell out of that podcast. And I was talking with Roy at first, then Phil got in, and all three of us were like, we need a venue. We all want to do kind of these presentations of herpetoculture in like the kind of scientific meeting type atmosphere. And so we're going to be doing what equates to like half a day to 2/3 of a day of herpetoculture talks. So I'm going to be recruiting a bunch of speakers. The meeting is going to be in June. And if you want to attend, you can totally sign up. Please understand, this isn't like a Tinley kind of situation. But, if you went to the Gecko Symposium at the beginning of Tinley, it's definitely got that vibe to it. There is no selling of animals at all, so don't think that there's a show. That's not part of this. But this is more, knowledge and ideas. And so I'm going to be presenting a presentation there on naturalistic keeping techniques for hognose snakes. Notice a theme. It's like taking over my damn world. So anyway, but yeah, more details on that. And you can learn more about it on Project Herpetoculture as well, because I know that Roy is going to be promoting it on their show too. So I'm going to be letting you know like how much costs, dates. I do know right now that the meeting is in June. I think it's in mid to late June. Next episode, I'll have more details and a little bit more for you all to learn about. So yeah, that's my big update. So if you're near Knoxville, that's where the meeting's going to be happening. Highly, highly, highly recommend this. If you are on the nerdy side of herpetoculture and you like the science and you like you like to go field herping and you like the field conservation side of things and you like to kind of test your husbandry practice and think about it critically, this is I can't say enough about this meeting. It was wonderful, and the people there are fantastic. And so I'm thrilled to death at IHS. We had to get permission from their board, and they said go forward. So I have every intention of going forward. So yeah, that's that.
Very cool.
So big introduction this week, just because we had an awful lot to talk about. But I do think it's time we jump into this. So we're going to jump on. So without further ado, our guest tonight, if you keep dry marking, there's no way you don't know our guest. I know that many people, including myself, have gone to the website, which is now, I would argue, a little bit iconic in herpetoculture circles, just kind of going over everything that's on it. But our guest tonight is John Michels, and he's part of Black Pearl Reptiles. And yeah, we're thrilled to have you. So, John, how's it going?
How you doing, guys? Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on. This is it's always fun to sit and hang out and chat about snakes.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're doing. So, I guess we have some questions for you, obviously. First question is kind of our launching question, which is, like, how'd you get into this? Why colubrids? And how did you land on dry marking ultimately? And I know there were other species along the way, but
right.
That's what you're obviously known for today. So
right. Well, I started, as a kid, kind of more as a field person. It was just my older brothers and I, we go out, hiking and fishing and catching frogs and, grabbing snakes and whatever, and doing all that sort of thing. And, so snakes just always were sort of fascinating to me as a kid. And, so I, naturally along the line, I wanted to keep them in my room. I want to keep them and observe them and all that kind of thing as I'm a kid. And, my dad's, rule was, hey, listen, we're not spending any money on this stuff, but you want to go out and catch something, go ahead. So, I grew up in Southern California, so, it was gopher snakes and king snakes and stuff like that. And, invariably somewhere along the line, I started kind of testing out the whole, breeding and husbandry thing along it, just fooling around as a kid. I used to grab, 4 or 5, adult gopher snakes, and I just throw them into one big old terrarium, and the males would kind of combat a bit, and which I thought was super interesting. And, they breed and, and then I'd get eggs, and, I'd incubate the eggs and do all that. And all this is, pre-internet, I didn't know what I was doing. No clue. I wasn't even friends with anyone who was into snakes, I'm just screwing around. And, so I'd figured out how to hatch, the baby gopher snakes and whatnot. And I go, every spring I'd catch a handful, and every fall I'd release the adults and the babies back where I found them, and, all that sort of thing. And so I just kind of fiddled around with it. And, and then I kind of had to get serious in college and all that sort of business. But, post-college, I thought, man, now that I'm kind of an adult now and I can, buy some cool things, I started kind of going that route. And so I did that for a couple of years, just kind of odds and ends. And, and then I had, through field herping circles, met a few guys that bred snakes, And then I was, they sold their snakes for a little bit of money. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I had a friend who did Alterna and, that kind of thing. And so I thought, well, I'd kind of like to do that. That'd be fun. And so then it was, the whole boa thing never really interested me from a breeding perspective. I when I was kind of playing around with keeping things, I had some white-lip pythons because I thought were kind of, heavy metal looking kind of rock star kind of snakes, and, but then I was thinking, well, let's get something more manageable, something that I can be, that's maybe not quite as tricky as breeding, farm raised, white lip pythons, and so I settled on Honduran milk snakes, because I knew with my experience level, I wanted something that was a little smaller, but was also relatively easy to keep for being a newbie with this whole thing. And I wanted, I also didn't really have any experience with tricky feeding babies. So I chose to avoid, the Alterna route and that kind of thing at that stage in my career, if you want to call it a career, of my hobby. And so I did that for a while. And, I worked a lot with Shannon Brown, who you may know and remember. And And so he helped me kind of get into some of the morphs, and I played around with the morphs a little bit, and that was kind of fun. And, so then I, discovered the reptile shows. I'd get a booth and I'd sell some of my babies, and then it was, I got a little bit of money here, and, maybe this can help me pay for my feeders. Wouldn't that be nice? Self-sustaining hobby, and then I started scaling it up a little bit more, and then it was, I got a little extra cash here, so rather than pocket it, I'm just going to go buy more snakes, like we all do, just go buy more, and it wasn't long after that there was a guy near me who had who was selling a pair of adult black-tailed Cribos. And I just thought they were gnarly looking. I didn't know anything about them, but I just thought they were gnarly looking. They're huge, big, strong. I mean, a non-venomous cobra, essentially, Mm-hmm. And they were adults, and, so I took the plunge and I bought them, and through no real expertise on my end, I was able to breed them, And next thing you know, I've got, 20, baby black-tailed Cribos, and it's like, wow, holy crap, that's I got all these babies now, and I got to get the things feeding, And so that was a real sharp learning curve, learning. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that later, that these are, real prey generalist type snakes, and you don't really know what they want when they're babies. You got to figure it out, and then I discovered, the demand was really high for these things, and everyone wanted them, and it wasn't hard to sell them, and so I got all the babies feeding, and I sold them all, and then I took that money and I bought a pair of Eastern Indigos from a guy up in the San Francisco area, and and then it just kind of snowballed from there. And it wasn't long after that it was, well, shoot, these Drymarchon are awesome. I just completely fell in love with the intelligence, the power, the inquisitiveness, the temperament, everything about Indigos and Cribos I'm just totally into. And then I just kind of nerded out on that whole thing. And there's 6 major subspecies in the pet trade, and I want them all, Yep. And I got to have them all. And so that happened, and then I started kind of producing them all. And then it was, well, I'd like to have a breeding group of each of those 6 subspecies, And somewhere along that line, I met a guy who's now my business partner with it, Chris Rodriguez, who formerly worked at the LA Zoo in the reptile house, and he shared a similar interest in all the Drymarchon, and so between the two of us, we pooled our collections. We figured out how it was going to look from a business model standpoint with, his expertise and my expertise and whatever, and then every penny we made was not pocketed. Every penny we made was reinvesting in cages, reinvesting in new animals, and building our collection. And man, I mean, these are high-end snakes, and every penny we sold went into building what later became, Black Pearl reptiles. And it was, we wanted to have an exceptional breeding group of each of the major subspecies, and then as color variations came out, well, we need a breeding group of that color variation and another one of this color variation, and and then we wanted to have as big a base as possible for each of those subspecies, so we could kind of get, we're going to talk about inbreeding later, but get more diverse stock and genetics and things like that. And it really wasn't for a whole decade that it started being like, okay, we kind of have like a little business here, and we're working with animals that we are super passionate about and I think are super cool, and we're selling them and and enjoying a little bit of profit on it, and so it kind of went from there. So just a slow progression over the course of 20 years all in all, from playing around with gopher snakes in my garage to now I got a couple hundred snakes with very fast metabolism. So that's kind of the arc of how it all went down.
So one thing I want to reiterate and point out for everyone that just heard that I admire that what you said. and it was the order of what you said too. Whenever you started to make a little money on it, the first thing that you said you went and did was got better caging, upgraded that piece. And I think that is so important, and something that I think so many people get ahead of themselves, where it's, I need to get more pairs of this, or I need to, get that pair of that more. But the first thing that you said you did was got more cages, got better caging, and upgraded that. So kudos to you there. That's awesome.
No, I appreciate that. And, just to give you a shout out, Clint, I've only discovered your podcast a couple weeks ago, and I've listened to a couple episodes by now, and I really enjoy the market piece. Thank you. One of the things that I really find interesting about it, even just what you guys were talking about a few minutes ago, with the data from Morph Market and so forth, is that, one of the things that I think we don't really talk about enough is the business side of it and the market side of it. And I find that really fascinating. And that's kind of, one of the sub passions that I have in doing what I do with all this stuff. I was a finance major coming out of college, but I knew I didn't want to do that as my kind of day job, so to speak. But I've really enjoyed kind of, the business aspect of it all. And so, when there's data, I love looking at it, and so I've appreciated the little segments that you've had there. That was pretty cool.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I will say that, when Zach and I were talking about that, it was, and I've even mentioned it to him, where I think that the market piece wasn't really discussed too often by too many in a public setting.
Right.
Because there can be a stigma that comes along with it, where, you get labeled as, they're only in it for the money kind of thing. And I just don't believe that's true. There's certainly those out there that are like that, but I think there are a lot of us that we want to be able to be fully engrossed in this every day, that this is what we want to do for a living because of how much we love it. But in order to be able to do it for a living, there is a business side to this that we have to understand. And it doesn't mean that, right back to the point of you invested in the cages first, before getting bigger. That's what it's about. It's, if you're going to do this as a business, making sure you're doing it with the animal's best care in mind, and that will make your business succeed to a greater extent. So, good stuff, man. Good stuff.
No, I agree, and I've had this exact conversation with people in the past that you're 1,000% correct. That there does seem to be a stigma that if you are actually making money, selling reptiles or whatever, that somehow there's a stigma that you're, the mammal equivalent of a puppy mill. That somehow if you do a high volume, or if you are profitable, or whatever you want to call it from a business perspective, that somehow that means that your animals are lesser quality or not being as well taken care of, or whatever it is that you want to say. But, where along the line do we talk about, maybe good business is offering good animals?
Yeah.
And so, being successful from a business perspective doesn't necessarily mean that your product is garbage. It's kind of the opposite in my mind. So I don't know. It's a weird stigma that's happened in the herpetoculture circles. So I really appreciate that people are talking about it in kind of a positive sense, because there are a lot of breeders out there that want to make a few bucks, and, whether it's their full-time job or something, a side hustle, or just monetizing something that they enjoy doing, I think it's worthy of talking about. So I appreciate that segment.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Very cool. So why don't we talk a little bit about the different dry marking before we jump into all the husbandry stuff? So you mentioned that there were 6 subspecies or 6 taxa. Mm-hmm. What are the 6? And then if you don't mind, just kind of giving the highlight reel of what you like about them, what you don't like about them. Just kind of shoot from the hip, and I'd love to hear your opinion.
As you're about to do this, I want to tell our listeners, if you are listening to this and you've got your phone out or by your computer, blackpearlreptiles.com, if you go to that, because that's where I'm at right now, as we're about to hear about each of the different types, you've got an awesome website here, buddy.
Yes.
I'm taking it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
But I mean, you can click and kind of follow along and see what it is that's being discussed. So I just wanted to put that out there now so that you had visuals if you'd like.
Go for it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and then, I mean, not to belabor the issue, but that kind of piggybacks on the business part of it. One of the things that I really, think has gone well is that you have to have a visual along with whatever it is that you're trying to sell. So a website with good pictures, and it seems like somewhere along the line of all this, people kind of went more social media route and not website route. But I've always tried to funnel people through the website, and I've actually, so just. I don't know. I feel like I neglect it sometimes, but just have it be an informational hub, with photos and text and whatever else. But so anyway, you're right. On the website, I do try to outline the 6 major subspecies that are in the pet trade. So to break it down, you have 3 that we commonly use the word indigo snake as a common name. There is the eastern indigo snake, which I think is the iconic colubrid, in my opinion, and that a lot of people know about. They're native to the southeast part of the United States. They're listed as threatened on the Endangered Species Act. I feel like that has the most public exposure. People know about the eastern indigo snakes. Big, huge colubrids, powerful, strong, inquisitive, intelligent. And with great temperaments. And so they're kind of, in my opinion, kind of known as the iconic colubrid, really, that's out there. But along with that, there are 5 others that I feel like people should know about, particularly if you're into colubrids and large colubrids and indigo snakes. So there's the Texas indigo snake, which obviously is native to Texas, the southern part of Texas. But a lot of people also don't realize that they range all the way pretty far south into Mexico as well. They actually have a very large geographic range. And those are really neat. So we've got a group of those. Then there are also the Mexican indigo snakes. When that's really kind of interesting because, we can get into this later, but science side, I would love to have someone spend some time looking at the taxonomy of Mexican Trimarchon because there's a lot going on down there. But the Mexican indigo snake is more along the west coast of Mexico, from Sonora and ranging all the way down into Michoacan and Guerrero. And then it can kind of hook in a little bit inland and head towards the east as well. And in their natural range. So they have a very large range as well. And within that group, there are different color variations. And I kind of try to simplify it down into black and red. We'll get into that. So those are kind of the 3 major indigo subspecies. You've got the eastern indigo, the Texas indigo, and the Mexican indigos. Then as you can kind of continue further south in the Americas, you've got the black-tailed cribo. You've got the unicolor cribo, which are more Central American. They'll range from southern Mexico down to Colombia. Black-tailed cribo is obviously a tan-looking animal with a black tail. Really wild face markings and are really intriguing snakes. Unicolor cribo, we can get into this if we want. It's a whole other subject to debate, but essentially the same snake with a lighter tail. So that's why they can get that name unicolor cribo. And their ranges can often overlap, and you can debate the taxonomy of it and whether or not they're really legitimate subspecies, but that's the way they're described now, and they're in Central America. And as you continue further south, pretty much the entire South American continent has yellow-tailed cribos, native in that range from Venezuela all the way down to Argentina. So massive natural range for the yellow-tailed cribo. So to sum it up, you've got the 3 indigos that are further north. You've got the 3 cribos that are further south. You'll sometimes see the word indigo used as a common name to describe some of the cribos. Mid-America indigo snake or South American or whatever. But in general, in herpetoculture, we've got the black-tailed cribo, the unicolor cribo, and the yellow-tailed cribo. So that's kind of a brief little summary of the 6 of the major ones that are in the U.S. Pet trade.
Other than visual appearances, are there size differences between the different subspecies or disposition differences, anything like that? Any other notable characteristic differences?
They're minor. There are some temperament differences. There are some of those subspecies that, on average, tend to be a little bit more defensive than others. Size, a little, on average, maybe a half a foot this way or that way. But in general, to really oversimplify it all, they're really all the same snake with a different paint job. The care is very similar. Whether it's from Argentina or Texas or South Florida, the care is remarkably similar for all 6 of those. So it's, any differences between those 6 are pretty minute, in my opinion.
Very cool.
All right, good deal.
So I have a couple kind of questions specific. So let's talk about the Mexicans for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because with Rubidis, I believe that's a subspecies name for them. So sometimes they're called Rubidis if you're talking to a Drymarching person. Right. We've got this red-bellied thing, and then this black-bodied, white-bellied thing. And I have, I've gone down rabbit holes trying to understand. There's oftentimes kind of questions about how did they get here, and I figured this was something that, rather than run away from it, let's just hit it straight on the head. So,
sure.
Has the white-bellied, black-bodied Rubidis been in herpetoculture longer than the red-bellied? Like, what's just kind of spitball the history of those guys and what's going on? And
overall, I think so. Yes. It wasn't that long ago. Several decades ago, when there weren't any restrictions from moving animals from Mexico into the U.S. So there were a lot of Mexican species of animals in the pet trade that came when it wasn't regulated, And so I think the pet trade had the more of the black and white Rubidis going on, and these were kind of the old school days when herpetoculture was a little bit more about just sort of keeping wild snakes rather than captive propagation.
Yeah.
And so, but they persisted, and enough people bred them that they kind of took hold into the pet trade. And there were some red ones around, but there's certainly been a lot more of an explosion of the red ones in the pet trade in the last 10 years or so, I would say. With all that stuff coming into the U.S., and a lot of stuff went to Europe. Lots of stuff went from Mexico to Europe, and you have the world is just smaller than it used to be. It's a lot easier to get animals from one country to another, and there's certainly downsides to that from a conservation perspective, from a legal perspective, but there's also some upside for the hobbyists like us that we can get access to pretty cool things that people are breeding in Europe or whatever else. So a lot of animals that I have came from Europe. It's just a lot easier to get animals from other parts of the world than they used to be. You used to have to, go through importers that were bringing through, crates full of wild-caught snakes and all that. But with the kind of explosion of captive propagation in the last few decades, and the world just kind of getting smaller, we're able to kind of get some neat stuff into the pet trade.
Okay, and then the other one I'd like to hit on a little bit is yellowtails. So I was when I was building the collection here at the school, I knew I wanted Drymarching, and I picked up some. I believe they were from your stock, and somebody bought them, kind of raised them up to they were about 3-4 feet each, and then they wanted to move them on, and then I picked them up at that point. And they've been here since the onset of the degree, which they were bought in 2016. They've bred twice. We've gotten 2 clutches out of them.
Cool.
And what's really cool about them is the male is like a 7-foot corn snake, super chill. And the female, we named her Karen for her attitude. Sorry if that offends you, but some days she's great, and then about every 5th to 6th interaction, she does a lot of tail buzzing and she does a lot of mock strikes. But it's kind of like the boy does not fit the kind of stereotypical, somewhat cranky yellowtail. Female does. What's your experience with temperament with the yellowtails? And do you have any suggestions to kind of calm them down? Because they did not live up, even though Karen, as the students named her, can be testy, she's still I don't really ever get struck at because I just kind of go in and confidently grab her and use a hook, move her to where I need to be, put her down, and everything's okay.
Right.
But do you have any comments to that idea?
Sure. I mean, there's when you're talking about yellowtail specifically, for a lot of years, the pet trade was just sort of flooded with wild caught animals because a lot of them are coming from Suriname and Guyana, which is where a lot of the South American species come into the pet trade because those countries are open to, exporting wild caught animals, right? So we just get tons of these snakes, and you're a Cribo and you're pulled out of the wild and you're a 6-foot long snake and you're thrown into a bag and sent across the world. They're generally pretty cranky, but that can be different from captive bred animals, and and we're just talking about temperament here, but you can also talk about parasites and disease and how well established it is, and they're prone to being dehydrated and all those sorts of things. But that being said, I think you do find that captive bred snakes will tend to be calmer on average than the wild caught snakes. And when you raise them from babies, one of the things that I really like about indigos and cribos in general is that they figure it out pretty quick.
Yep.
I've had snakes where they just never figure it out. Doesn't matter how much you handle them, they just never figure it out. And whether that's a feeding response or whether it's a defensiveness thing, like, listen, dummy, I've held you every day for the last 2 years. I'm not trying to hurt you. Indigos and cribos tend to figure it out pretty fast, and people throw around the word, intelligent. But for me, kind of one of the barometers of that is that they figure it out pretty fast. They've got a hell of a feeding response, but once you get them in your hands, they know it's over. I've had Taiwan beauty snakes or rosy boas or king snakes or whatever that it doesn't matter. They feel flesh; they're going to bite you. Whereas these guys just sort of figure it out. So if you work with your snakes a bit and you handle them, they can calm down pretty quickly. And you have to know that there's still going to be variability within individuals. Some individuals are just, as you've experienced with your yellowtails, are naturally defensive and they can just have a chip on their figurative shoulder, and others just are calm. So that's going to happen, but when you're working with them, you can get them to be pretty manageable, even a pretty cranky one with frequent handling, particularly if you raise it from being young. It's not 100% success rate, but because you're going to get those Karens of the world, but at the same time, you could work with them. Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
We want to go into care?
Sure.
Ready? Yeah, let's do that. Let's start talking about how do we take care of these bad boys. I mean, these things are gorgeous, big, heavy-bodied snakes.
Right.
So what's caging look like?
Well, I'm a rack person, and I know that's going to differ from a lot of people who listen on with this. I absolutely appreciate and respect the natural setups and so forth, and I wish I had the space to do that. But that being said, I keep my stuff in racks, and they're successful, and they're happy, and they're doing their thing. They're large colubrids, so they're going to need a big space. But one of the things that I think is important for them that a lot of people don't get. I mean, this is really husbandry tip number one if you're considering owning an Indigo or a Cribo is temperature. That a lot like the Carinata. I was just listening to your Carinata episode earlier today. They can't handle the heat. They want it cooler, which is kind of bizarre for people to grasp because they're kind of perceived as this tropical animal. But they don't tolerate high temperatures. And that's really the first thing, so I'll have buyers come to me and they'll say, my snake room can get into the upper 80s in the summertime. I said, this is not the snake for you. They're generally happiest between 78 and 82 degrees, somewhere in that pocket, and that can go down to 76. And if it goes much over 82, it needs to be just short periods of time, a couple hours in the afternoon, because in general, they can't tolerate prolonged elevated temperatures. So if you're mid 80s or above for extended amounts of time, your snake is going to dehydrate very quickly. They're going to stress out, regurgitate, and it'll ultimately kill them. So you can't keep them like a ball python. You can't keep them like you would a lot of other colubrids that they prefer to have temperatures that are cooler than other species that you might keep. With that, I generally prefer to regulate ambient temperatures. And when they're youngsters, I give them a little bit more of a temperature gradient. But I generally just keep stuff at ambient. I find it, number one, safer, where I have a lot less risk of malfunction of the heating of racks or thermostats and things. And they're just really seem to be happy if their ambient is in that 78 to 82 range, they're thrilled. And they do really well. So, that's really what I would say is the first thing that people need to think about when you're talking about indigos.
So when you say racks, can we talk a little bit about what racks you're using?
Sure. I use BOA Vision racks or Vision BOA racks. And that's, the largest tub that Vision makes. And I wouldn't go any smaller than that for adults. And some of my adults, I need to go there. In cages, but a lot of people will do a 6x2 cage. And I'm not quite that big. But I certainly wouldn't go any smaller than a Vision BOA tub.
Gotcha. And then with the neonates, when you're raising them up, do they go into just a normal hatchling rack, or are they in a different type setup, like a 8 or 12 quart tub, or what do you do on that front?
I'm sorry, if you can hear me, I can't hear your audio. Give me a minute, maybe I can figure this out.
All good.
Man.
Dun, dun, dun.
I still can't hear you guys. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I just totally lost you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome to Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
No, I'm still not getting anything. What's the best thing for me to do? Should I disconnect and reconnect, or?
Yeah, leave and come back in.
Yep.
Yes?
Yes. If you could see us.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I will do my best to get right back in here.
No worries.
And we'll figure it out.
While we're waiting for him to come back, I've pulled up Vision. I was looking for the measurements on those tubs, and I'm not finding that quite yet. Let's see. Looks like it's going to be somewhere, if the rack footprint is 21 inches by 34 and a half, then the tubs are going to be real close to that, just to give an idea on the size of the BOA tubs that he was referring to. So,
okay, I'm back and I can hear you.
Fantastic.
All right. Sorry about that. Technological difficulties.
Hey, man, we made it through.
Got you.
That's what matters.
Okay,
All
cool.
right.
So where are we?
So what I asked was, what are the babies going into? So they hatch out pretty decent sized. Are they going into an 8-quart tub, a 12-quart tub, no tub? what are you doing?
I like shoebox tubs. Yeah, just 6-quart tubs. One of the things that I think can be a challenge for my buyers at times is that as babies, they are sort of high anxiety snakes. They can be prone to being a little stressed, and so more often than not, when I have one of my buyers call me a couple weeks after buying a snake for me, and they say, "Hey, my snake won't eat," I'll ask them about the setup. And in general, simple and stress-free environment with the right temperature is best. And there are a lot of people that want to put them directly into glass cages, or have an area that's large. That can stress them out. To have a small, simple setup is best. So I prefer the 6-quart shoebox tubs for my hatchlings. And then obviously as they get bigger, I'll scale them up to the 28-quart tubs, and then on up to the what used to be the CB70s. I don't know what you call them anymore. The 41-quart tubs. And then on to the adult size. But yeah, generally smaller, simpler tubs that don't have any visual stimulation.
Gotcha. What substrate are you using for hatchlings, and kind of what do you end up using for your adults?
This is another key. I feel like if I can start with the adults. Sure. One of the negative things that you'll hear, and you guys know where I'm going with this already, I'm imagining. I do. From Indigos and Cribos is that their fecals are just nasty. And that's true. That's 100% true. It's like wet cement, and it's projectile. It's not laying a log. You'll get it on the sides, you'll get it on the ceilings, and all that sort of thing. So, and it... Exactly. And it doesn't smell great, and obviously we'll talk about diet later, but diet has a little bit to do that. But that being said, one of the things that I do for the adults, which is an absolute game changer for me, is I'll have them on aspen shavings. Okay. I want to dry them out, which is weird because they have humidity requirements. So I like my cages to be dry. And then in those aspen shavings, I will mix in compressed pine pellets. You can also buy them as compressed paper pellets. I get mine from a feed store, and people will use it as pellets that they throw down on the bottom of horse stalls, because it's designed to soak up liquid and to eat that odor. And so when anything liquidy, indigo poop, whatever, hits these pellets, they sort of disintegrate into this sort of granular kind of sand type, texture rather than a pellet. And so it eats up the liquid, it eats up the odor, and it's an absolute necessity, in my eyes. Now, again, there one of the things that, that I try to follow too is that I try to be humble enough to know that, listen, there are other people that are just as successful, if not more so, with doing this species, breeding the species, keeping the species, and they do it differently. So there are absolutely more ways than one to be successful with these kinds of snakes. But for me, this is my experience. I think the pellets are really kind of a big deal as far as mitigating that odor of the fecals. So the aspen shavings mixed in with the compressed pine pellets as the base. And then they do have humidity requirements. So rather than try to control the humidity of the entire enclosure, I give each snake a humid hide box. And so for the adults, that's going to look like a shirt box tub, 28-quart shirt box tub, with a big enough hole drilled off to one side in the lid, and I fill it with damp sphagnum moss. And so they will go in and out of that as their humidity requirements dictate. So when they're in the blue, they're going to be sitting in there, and when they're ready to shed, that's what they're going to be using. And then so that can keep the cage cleaner, it can keep it more odor free, It's a lot easier to manage, in my opinion, but they can still get the same humidity requirements from their humid hide box. So that's what I do for adults and sub-adults. The hatchlings, I will put those straight on cocoa mulch just to keep the humidity a little higher because I'm not worried about those little turds. It's the big ones that I have to worry about. Right. So that's kind of a breakdown of the substrate.
I'll tell you, I think that setup you just described seems to work for so many colubrid species. I'm finding where having a drier cage with a humid hide seems to you eliminate a lot of potential bacteria issues that are going to grow faster and these keeping the entire thing humid.
Exactly.
There's a lot of skin issues, blistering or any kind of scale rot stuff like that gets cut out. I also think that on aspen it still happens, don't get me wrong, but what are the little flies called, Zach? The
syrphid flies.
Yes. I think you get fewer of those because the feces is being dried out faster.
Right.
So, but, to the point, almost every species needs access to some type of humidity at some point, especially during shed cycles, unless we're just talking about desert species. But even then, a lot of the desert species will find crevices and cracks, to get the humidity they need. So I think that setup works fantastic for a lot of species. And I'm sitting here smiling because as I cruise, through your webpage, I'm like, may have to get a pair of these. May have to look at those. And it's sounding like the setups aren't too bad at all. So.
Well, I try to keep it simple, and particularly when you have a high volume of snakes, I try to keep it simple. It's the old, was it the Caulfield, the keeper and the kept, simple can be better sometimes. Again, not to say anything negative about the people that do more of the elaborate naturalistic setups, and I know you guys are dabbling in that stuff too, but it works, and ultimately, I'm about does it work, and and to your point about other species, Drymarchon's the bread and butter. That's the passion. That's what I do. That's what we do a lot of. But I get interested in side projects like everybody else, and so I'll invariably buy a little group of this or a little group of that and kind of play with it. And one of the things that I added to the collection this year were some mandarin rat snakes and some the conspiculata, and then I got some Loxocemus bicolor as well, which I thought were kind of cool. And, more burrowing, heavy substrate, cooler, more humid kind of species. But I set them up the same way I do my baby indigos. And by no means am I having any kind of professional opinion on this because I only got them a few months ago. But they seem to be just really happy in the same kind of setup. I've got them on dry shavings with a humid hide box. And obviously I'm managing the temperature a little bit differently. But they're growing, they're eating, they're pooping, they look super happy. So I think you're right. I think it's a setup that can be usable for a lot of different species.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of like bamboos and things along those lines this year on aspen. I swapped them whenever winter hit, my babies, anyway, because I found that when the furnace started running. And the humidity was sucked
Dries them out even more.
Yeah,
right.
Then I was like, okay, now I got to do a little bit of a change up. But I think that setup it really does. It works for so many.
Yeah.
I'm pretty positive on one of the other podcasts you're on. I heard about the wood pellets, and I didn't realize that was you. But I was having issues with my false water cobras, which everybody makes this comparison between Drymarchon and Hydrodynastes because they're both like giant colubrids from South America.
Exactly.
And I can honestly say that addition to the substrate helped me because the only thing that may rival Drymarchon with its spray painting abilities is a false water cobra.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when they go, I've said this before, it's like it goes beyond a toddler crapping. It's like a 4-year-old human being dropping a deuce in a snake cage.
Oh, it's terrible.
So you need something to absorb that liquid. And I've got those big adult breeders in my office at work
No.
So I needed something like immediately to absorb. So I can't. Yeah, I can also test. I can say that's if you have large snakes and you're dealing with feces and you got to get it out of the way and get it absorbed and almost like a kitty litter effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can vouch for that too because it was. I've always wondered like where the hell did you hear this? It had to have been you.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Probably, and I don't. Frankly, I don't remember where I discovered it. I one of the things that I really enjoy about having a business partner with it is that he and I just bounce ideas off each other all the time. It sounds like you two collaborate in the same way, but to be able to just constantly be having him trying things out at his house that I'm not doing and vice versa, and then have us sharing ideas and what works. And that's anything from feeding hatchlings, which dominates a lot of our conversation, to care and the substrate and the caging. And, we're always looking for a way to get better. And it doesn't matter how long you're doing this for, there's always a way to get better.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree 100%.
So why don't we just jump right into feeding? Because this is definitely a fun topic. Feeding the established adults, I can honestly say from my experience, we've had blacktails, easterns, and yellowtails here at the school. And feeding the adults is just fun. It's just if they're eating.
Right.
We'll just talk a little bit about the feeding response. So
that's a good one. Well, listen, it's I don't know too many things that top it. False water cobras are in that conversation. As you've worked with Musarana can be in that conversation, but they're absolute sledgehammers. And one of the things that really drew me in about Drymarchon in general is that they're not constrictors and they're not venomous. It's just blunt force. Mm-hmm. They just grab and overpower and swallow, and that's how they eat. And it doesn't matter what they're eating. If they're eating another snake or a baby alligator or a turtle or a frog or whatever, they just grab and crush and swallow, and they don't care. How
badass is that? Let's just own that for a second. I mean,
yes.
How badass do you have to be to just will something to be your food? You know what I mean? You're not biting with venom. You're not squeezing. You're just, this is going to happen, and you're going to take it, kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's totally right. And I mean, the responsible and safe side of me feeds frozen thawed, but where it really gets exciting is if you're feeding live, because when they have to kill something and you're watching it is something to behold. So when you talk about the feeding response, and there are some videos that I have on YouTube that you can check out, but it's not a strike and recoil. As constrictors will do, they'll bite their prey, they'll pull it into their coils. Indigos are the opposite direction. They bite through the prey item. I mean, it's blunt force trauma. They hit it and they take it another foot past. And it's like a Mike Tyson punch that they're hitting the prey item. So when you're talking about a feeding response, it's not like they're trying to bite and pull it in. They're lunging. And I just find that fascinating. I mean, that's just so cool. So, it's definitely something to behold, and it's different than you'll see in a lot of other snakes. It's kind of one of those things that you just don't really know until you see it yourself and you keep them yourself. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, I can. Well, I mean, with their ophiophagy, they're eating other snakes. They're one of the few snakes that has elicited a legitimate stylized behavior in their prey snakes. Like, you can go online and watch the videos of the Texas Indigos when they stumble upon an Atrox or Western Diamondback. Like, the Diamondback has a completely different anti-predatory behavior that gets initiated in the presence of an indigo compared to, like, literally anything else.
Yeah, and they'll hide their heads. They'll hide their heads because the indigos are so smart and they have such good vision that they'll just track the head and grab the head.
Yeah. And
the Atrox have figured that out.
Yep, and they got bite force. I was tagged by an adult Eastern before, and it was actually it wasn't a prey, but it was all right, put me down, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like a aggressive thing, but it was just like a pop type thing,
right?
And it hurt.
Yeah, right.
Like, I've been popped by rat snakes and king snakes and even false water cobras before, and it didn't. There's a sensation,
right?
But this kind of had the sensation of being like tapped by a hammer. Like I was like,
right, because they're literally punching you, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's and it speaks to kind of them being a little bit smarter. You'll have other snakes chew on you and try to swallow your finger, and Indigo's never going to do that. If it's going to bite you, it's not going to try to eat you. So you're not getting that chomping, grinding kind of a bite, but it hits you, it bites you, and then they let go and they move on about their day.
Yeah. So when it comes to feeding,
mm-hmm.
they are, I think you said already that they're generalists, but
right.
Why don't we talk about feeding adults that are established, and then we can go to getting the little guys to eat.
Right. So the adults are, pretty easy. If your care is right, your temperature is right, and the snakes are happy and they're not stressed, they'll eat, and they'll eat well. And the vast majority of my snakes, never skip a meal. It doesn't matter if they're in the blue or not. I'm kind of more of the camp that I don't like to overfeed. They do have fast metabolisms, true. But as adults, particularly in the adult males, and they're not spending energy on egg production, they can get obese. And so rodents are a big part of my diet, but it's not the only part, and it's managed. So in general, and I've heard you guys talk about this, I don't remember which episode, but you've talked about this before when you're talking about prey size. In general, because they can be snake eaters, Drymarchon can't disarticulate their jaws to the same volume that other snakes can. And so you feed them smaller prey items. So I might have a 7-foot snake that's as thick as my arm, but I'm only giving it a small rat rather than a large rat. And maybe they can choke down the large rat, but if they can, I don't really believe it's good for them. So a standard meal for me, if I just really want to make it an average situation, is a small to medium rat and a chick once a week, just to simplify it for you, right? And obviously I might ramp things up for females after or, before egg laying, but that's a standard meal for me. Now that being said, they will eat anything pretty much that you throw at them. There are some individual preferences with individual snakes, but in general, I love feeding them frog eggs from the Asian market as kind of a little bit of variability in there. Strips of fish will be great. They'll eat a whole trout. If it's appropriately sized, they'll eat whatever you really want to throw at them. It's not often that I feed them other snakes. Back when I was field herping a lot more, and there would be roadkill snakes that are fresh. I'll freeze them off to kill any kind of parasites. And boy, you think they have a feeding response when you're feeding them rodents. Wait till you feed them a snake. They go absolutely berserk. And we can talk about that with the babies as well. But most snakes, most Drymarchon will eat damn near anything. I've tried the Reptilinks, and I've found that most will like them and enjoy them. So I like that as a good way to vary the diet. I'm also a believer in a varied diet for snakes that are natural generalists in the wild. I think it's good for them to give them as many things as you can. But that being said, an average meal for me is 1 rat, 1 chick. But throwing in quail, throwing in fish, throwing in frogs, whatever it may be, as long as it's clean and I don't have to worry about bacteria or whatever else, I think it's a great situation. There was one of my things that I tried and I think failed and I moved on from was that I was buying chicken necks. And I was buying them in bulk from a carniceria, near my house, Hispanic meat market. And I'd buy this big old block of frozen, chicken necks, and I was feeding them those, and they loved them. But the poops weren't quite right, and the snakes didn't seem as healthy about it afterwards. Every once in a while, I get a regurg or something, and I think it was just because they were dirty, And I don't know if it was salmonella or whatever else, but as long as it's clean, they'll eat it. And if you've got food grade fish from the market or frog legs from the Asian market or whatever, I love that as a way to vary the diet for your adults. I think the more you vary it, the happier they'll be.
Cool.
Babies. You want to move on to babies?
Yes.
So this is the real trick, right? Because, and this is sort of the way I analyze it, because they are prey generalists in the wild, I find that the babies are often hardwired to eat something that is not a rodent. And if you look at the gut content of a lot of the wild snakes, they're eating rodents, but not nearly to the degree that we sort of expect it in the pet trade. When I sell a snake, the expectation that buyers have is that it's feeding on rodents. And so, the bulk of the work that I need to do to run Black Pearl Reptiles is getting babies established. And, if everyone was just sort of cool with the idea that they can and should be eating things other than rodents, it would make life a lot easier because they'll eat. But, it's getting them to eat rodents is another story. But the frustrating part is, and I learned this with that very first clutch of black-tailed Cribos that I was describing earlier, is that you don't know what they want to eat. Sometimes they want a fish, and sometimes they want a frog, and sometimes they don't want a frog, but they want a toad. And sometimes they want a lizard, sometimes they want a snake. So it can be frustrating. You get a high volume of these baby snakes, and it can be difficult. So in general, I would say that starting with scenting with fish or some sort of poultry works well. Those are also generally readily available in the pet trade. To buy a frozen chick or a quail works well. And fish is obviously more readily available. But then even within those categories, you can still have some differing amounts of success depending on the individuals. Are you just sprinkling the pinky with feathers from a quail, or are you actually rubbing the pinky in the yolk content from inside the quail? Are you using tilapia fillets from the market, or using a trout that you caught fishing that's wild caught? And all those have differences, on average. So that's the bulk of the labor. And then when you're talking about the different of the 6 major subspecies, they can all have average tendencies as well. In general, Texas Indigos are, in my experience, by far and away the easiest to start. And I would say 90% of them go straight to rodents right out of the gate. So if you're wanting to dabble in dry marcon breeding, you might want to start with a Texas Indigo if you're a little leery of getting babies established. That they're just significantly more easy. Second place to that, I would say, is probably the Rubitus, the Mexican Indigos. That they'll tend to start on rodents a little bit easier than some of the others. And then as far as the 3 Cribos, the yellowtails, blacktails, unicolors, and even the Easterns, those can take a little bit more work. You'll still get a certain percentage of your clutch that goes, straight to rodents. But, it's not uncommon to get a clutch of 20 black-tailed Cribos and not one of them wants rodents right out of the gate. So it takes some work. But, the upshot of it all, and I'm making it sound really daunting, the upshot of it all is that really once you get a few meals down them, they are aggressive feeders. And they'll start hammering, food. And that might be that you have to put a little dab of fish scent on a pinky, every week for 3 months. But they'll rip it off the tongs, So, they are pretty aggressive. So in general, you get 4 or 5 meals of something down them, then they'll start eating anything. And so you just have to kind of get to that point. And then there's all kinds of other strategies that, that we've used over the years. And there's a hand feeding method where you hold the snake in your hand and you tease it with a prey item, and they'll grab it like that and start swallowing. Starts as a defensive bite, and then it moves into feeding. There's a method like that. I think I have a video on my YouTube channel on that. I didn't invent that method, by no means taking credit, but it is one that we use. And I know people use it a lot with some of the arboreal colubrids. I've done it with some of the fire and axe, and I know Jason does it too, right? Yeah, some of the spilotes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, there's that method too. So there are different things that you can do, but in general also, and we'll shift a little bit towards some of the physiology of the babies, Eastern indigos and Texas indigos are significantly larger babies than the others. And I don't really know evolutionarily why that is. But
everything's bigger in Texas.
Oh, that's definitely true. Some of these baby Texans are gigantic. But the Cribos are long and skinny, and they're pretty wiry when they're young. And given that they have fast metabolisms, those are the ones I tend to stress out a little bit more over, because you've got to get some meals down them. They're not going to be able to go 4 months with no meals in them. Mm-hmm. Whereas, Texans or Easterns might be able to handle that a little bit better, because they're born with just a ton of body weight. And sometimes they hatch with just a gigantic yolk bolus, and they're just fat for several weeks after hatching, and you don't even need to worry about it. But the Cribos deserve a little bit more attention, when you're trying to get them feeding earlier on in the process. They hatch, I let them shed a week later, and then it's to work, man.
Yeah. I have a funny story real quick about exactly what you said. It reinforces it. So he listens to our show, and he's a great guy. Tim Brophy, he breeds Easterns, and he reached out to us when he found out we were working with OCIC with the indigo snakes.
Right.
And he asked if we would be willing to take a donation of some Eastern indigos, and I was like, yes. I was like, wow. It was kind of an immediate, yeah, we'll do that.
You sure you don't need to think about that?
Yeah. So, but he gave us 2 in November, December of 2022, and then he gave us 2 more in around August.
Awesome.
And one of the ones he gave us was a 2023 baby that he was just having a hard time getting it to eat. And Tim told me, once this thing eats once, you're golden. But until then, it's a royal pain in the ass.
Right.
But, I'll give it to you. So it's exactly what you were saying. So I tried everything. I tried quail. I tried scenting with snake skins. And it was a big baby, like you said. Right. I wasn't really stressing out. Well, the grad students came, and we had a false water cobra born that was just not doing well. It was stunted out of the egg. It was questionable whether it was going to make it or not. And, I put it down, and Tim said, if you have a baby snake, offer it. And so the only issue is a false water cobra baby is the same size as an indigo baby. So I thought nothing of it and took the snake, opened up the tub. It was here in the office, and I, have the falsie on the tongs, and I offer it. And that whole, punching through the prey item thing you talked about, that thing lost its damn mind, grabs the falsie, but now I got this, and it was this, yes, shit!
That's too big of a meal.
As big as the damn. So I ran out in the hallway and just started yelling, scissors! I need scissors!
That's right.
And all the professors know me, and they're like, what do we need the scissors for? Just give me the scissors! So, I grabbed a pair of scissors. These weren't fancy surgical scissors. These are just staples, cutting open an envelope.
Oh, yeah. You're in a rush. You got to cut that thing in half.
And the Easterns just, slobbering this thing down. And so I cut the last third off the water cobra. And I'm holding it in my right hand, and that's key for what happens next. And so I walk out in the hallway to give the scissors back. And as I'm turning up the hallway, the freaking president of the university is standing there with his wife and his wife's parents and goes, "Hello, Dr. Loafman, we'd like to see the animals." And he put his hand out to shake hands, but in the right hand, I have the last third of a false water cobra that, is bleeding and everything. And I went like, "Ho, hi there." And I made it 10 times more awkward. I was like, "Could you hold on a second?" And I walked across the hallway to the faculty member who's across the hallway. And he looked at me. He's a botanist, by the way. And I just threw this third of a false water cobra on his desk. He had no context of what the hell was happening. Wiped the crap on my pants, then came out and gave the president a tour. But all of that happened in this minute and a half of insanity. So, but
what a great story.
But after he ate the falsie, I offered him a hopper, and boom, he has not missed a meal since that snake.
Right. Well, yeah. So I would say two things to piggyback on that. What a great story. I had a similar experience early on when I was breeding Easterns. One of the first clutch or two that I had, and I had a baby that, man, I could not get feeding, and it had been now 3-4 months, and the snake's starting to get a little thin, and man, it didn't bat an eye at anything. Quail, I tried everything, all the tricks, did everything I could do. Nothing was happening. And at the time, I was also breeding Musarana. And so you know the struggles with those as hatchlings, as well. And there was a distributor near my house, an importer, where I would go and buy house geckos for my Musarana, that was my secret sauce for the Musarana. And while I was over there, the guy had a ribbon snake that had just dumped a bunch of babies. And I said, well, that's probably going to be helpful for me. How much for these babies? It's, I don't know, it was $5 a head or $10 or whatever it was. So I bought a handful of them and I took them home. And so they're alive, and I know people are going to have mixed feelings on live prey, but I think, there's no way this Eastern is going to do anything. It's such a pain. It's so finicky. And I throw in this live newborn ribbon snake in with the Eastern Indigo, and I'm telling you, it chased it around the tub. I mean, chased it. It's audibly huffing, and hooding up is the wrong word, but they do this sort of neck expansion thing where they sort of kink their head to the side and they just charge, and it's chasing it. And the ribbon snake's just going berserk, and it's just chasing it down. And it was just this immediate effect that the snake had. And that was, really one of my first powerful learning experiences of hey, listen, they don't want rodents. Yeah. They want other things. And even the adults, you see their behavioral change when you give them an alternative prey item. And it just reminds you that, these snakes are wired to eat other stuff. So that was pretty cool. And then, when you say that your snake switched to hoppers kind of right after that, one of the things that I look for when a snake is quote unquote established, it's not so much, and I heard you guys talking about this in a previous episode, not so much how many meals they've had. It's more, can I trust this snake is going to eat for its new owner? Right. And one of the things that you look for with Drymarchon is there's a switch in their confidence and in their personality. And when they're young, the first thing they want to do when you open their tub is run. And that might continue for a month and it might continue for 6 months. But there's a point somewhere along the arc of their development when they are the king of their tub and they have this territorial thing going on. And I don't mean that as far as defensiveness. I mean, when you open their tub, instead of running, they're going to turn and they're going to look and say, what's going on? What are you doing in here? Are you feeding me or what's up? And when they kind of start looking at you like curious and like what's going on here instead of running, that's when you're going to start thinking, okay, now this snake has the confidence that it's going to do that. And when you get to that point, that's when they just turn into feeding savages and they'll just eat for you every time. Yeah. And so it's just getting that switch to flip. And it might be 10 scented meals before that happens, and it might be 1. But once you get to that point and you get over that hump, you're good to go, and you're never going to have to worry about feeding that snake again.
Yep. It was shocking to me with that animal. Like, it was 3.5, 4 weeks of just like, no. And like you said, it would scoot to the back of the tub. I have little hide boxes in the tub, and it would like poke its head out when the tub opened up and then immediately withdraw.
Right.
And it just took that false water cobra. And then after that, I actually think that the behavior you're explaining, false water cobras do the exact same thing. They'll do this because they have this similar feeding response that the Drymarchon do. When they're young, they will try to escape until they realize what food is. The only difference in my experience between Drymarchon and Hydrodynastes is even though they're using the blunt force trauma that we talked about, the Drymarchon seem to have a little bit more elegance than the complete crackhead false water cobra that just is thrashing at everything. Like my Drymarchon haven't come up out of the tub. You don't know what the hell's going to happen with a falsie. It's like they're going to fire off the tub, hit the ground, then go after your toes. Like they just they're nuts. Which is why I love them. So
and you'll get your indigos to do that too. Varying by individual, but particularly in the summertime. I mean, you're still controlling the ambient in your room, but there's something about summertime when they'll launch out. I have a video somewhere on YouTube of at the time he wasn't very big, but he ended up being a 8.5-foot yellowtail that would. It was a coiled spring. You open the tub and he's out there and he's on the floor and he's chasing you across the room. And if you don't get a rat in his mouth, pretty quick, he's going to get one of your body parts in his mouth. It's crazy. And you get an 8-foot long snake doing that. I get it. Musarana will do something similar too. There's a point where they switch, and once they switch, it doesn't matter. They're coming after you.
No, it's funny you talked about the moosies. The only snake that has pushed me across the room and made me jump up on a table was a Musarana, a Boiruna. I was wearing socks, and that snake came out on the floor a million times when I was wearing chacos or I was wearing my shoes. And, it just kind of looks. But there was just something about the damn white ankle socks. And it came out, and I just knew immediately the way it, looked at my big toe. And I was like, oh, damn. And then I'm backpedaling, and as my feet moved faster, it got more excited. And so I just, launched up on the desk in my office. Stuff went everywhere. And it actually, it was fun. It was hysterical. It looked like a dog. It followed my foot up and was just kind of like, where's the prey item? Where is it? But all these snakes, I find this endearing.
This is why the subsection of the herpetoculture community loves snakes like this, because most snakes that are kept as pets aren't going to do anything like we just described. If all that sounds appealing, then all these weird obscure colubrids that are larger, that's for you.
Yeah, 100%.
It makes it so much more exciting.
Yeah, man, you got to be on your toes.
Absolutely. All right, so we know how to take care of the adults now. We know how to get babies going, or what to try. Let's talk about how to get babies.
Breed them. Okay.
Yeah. So what's breeding look like?
Breeding looks like this. They are winter breeders. Okay. So they want to breed when it's cool. And generally on the front end of the cooling cycle. So I've tried a lot of different things with success. As far as temperatures go, I will say that I'm not super precise. There were many years, a good decade worth of breeding, where I didn't really manage the temperatures at all. I keep them in the garage, and the temperatures here in Southern California, the photo period with the windows in the garage took care of that, and the temperature just dipped a bit in the winter, and they did their thing. I manage it a little bit more closely now, but in general, you're going to cool them a little bit in the wintertime. And when it's cooler, that's when you start pairing. So for me, where I live, you're talking about November. Sometimes as early as October, not really quite as much. Lately, for some reason, they've been wanting to go a little bit later into December. But generally, November, December is what you're looking at. And I think that kind of mirrors a lot of what they do in the wild as well. So,
rough idea on temperatures that you're looking at.
Right. Okay. So as I said before, I'm generally keeping my ambient in the upper 70s, sometimes low 80s. But I'm going to start dropping those daytime temperatures down into the mid 70s, perhaps low 70s. And then I'm going to let the night times get cooler than normal. I'll let it have that day and night fluctuation, whereas in the summertime, non-breeding season, it's just 78 all the time. But I'll let it get down into 65 or so, and that'll usually kick things in. I will say, you asked earlier about are there differences in between the 6 subspecies, and I will say that I've had a little bit more success with Easterns getting even colder than that. And there was a period of time where I haven't been doing it anymore, but there was a period of time where I took an entire rack and I put it on my back patio. Obviously it wouldn't work where you guys live, right? But here in Southern California, I did that, and I wrapped the whole rack in a tarp, and I put a thermostat on it, and I set it to 70 or something like that. Maybe it was even cooler than that, I think. And it's 45, 50 degrees out. And so the majority of the tub was 45, 50 degrees with a little heat off in the corner at 70. And man, they locked up. They locked up like crazy. And I feel like my fertility was better when they were cooler. We're talking about Easterns here specifically. So I think that's a key. If you're gonna temperature wise get them, want to breed Easterns, I would encourage you to go even colder, and that they will actually breed in 50 degrees. And I've had them locked up for over 24 hours at a time at 50 degrees. It's very bizarre. But they'll like that. But that being said, most of the Cribos and Indigos will still breed, in the mid 60s as well. So that works for me. I'll let the night times drop a little bit. I'll lower the day times a little bit, not by a ton, and that works pretty well. As far as pairing the snakes, as a lot of us breeders have seen with a lot of the colubrids, that it's not uncommon behavior for a male to bite the neck of a female. Mm-hmm. That king snakes will do it, and gopher snakes will do it. It's not uncommon at all, right? But there's a big difference, because when you're talking about the jaw strength and the teeth of Drymarchon, you're talking about potential for damage here. And so I've had it happen where before you can really do anything, that if the male wants it and the female's not quite ready, he may well bite her and try to do what he's going to do, and it can rip her skin right open. And one of the things that you'll see too with Indigos, Cribos, is that they have very large scales, but there's also very thin skin underneath it. And it's not very durable, to be honest with you. And so it's pretty easy to sort of slice open skin. And so we've had to treat gashes in some of our females from a breeding bite. So that has to be observed. So you have to watch that sort of thing. And there are certain individual males that are more prone to doing it than others. So you got to get to know your snakes. There are snakes that I trust completely in breeding because I know they're cool. I've been breeding them for a lot of years, and they're fine, and they're very gentle, and they're good. But there are others where not so much, and I know I got to watch them. And it has gotten to the point in some cases where some males are just not manageable, and I have to stop breeding them, and I got to bring in something else. I will say it's the exception to the rule, but it can happen. Observing your snakes, knowing the male, knowing the female, figuring out the right timing of it all, because a lot of this can be, stimulated by the male wanting it, but the female not being ready. And that can kind of get the bites stuff going. And then secondary to that is that even less common than that, but still possible, is that you will get predation issues. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes the male will want to eat the female. It's usually the male wanting to eat the female. And I know, Clint, you were talking about this with the Carinata, but in Drymarchon, I don't think we hit on this yet. Males get larger than females. Not by a ton, a half a foot to a foot, maybe a foot on average, I would say. But males get larger. And so, in general, any kind of predation issue is usually a male towards a female. Even if they're equal size, I've just seemed to notice that it kind of goes that way. And again, it doesn't happen that often, and it shouldn't happen if the timing is right. But it's something to be aware of. But again, these are all, the exceptions to the rule. It's not like this is happening constantly. I'm a lot more careful when I'm breeding Musarana, for example. I've had it happen where, I think you mentioned in the Carinata episode about I walked in and I had a yellowtail female halfway down the throat of the male. And fortunately, she did survive. I backed her out, and she wasn't happy, but she was still breathing and was cool, and she was fine. So, you have to watch, to protect the health of your animals and keep them happy and good. But that being said, when the timing's right, you're good to go. I do generally wait for a fresh shed. That does seem to prompt things. Changes in the barometric pressure seems to prompt things. When there's a storm or some kind of storm system coming through, I'll tend to pair during those periods of time a little bit more heavily. In general, I don't spread one male across a lot of females. I know that's a conversation that comes up sometimes with breeding, is that I really only do 1 or 2 females per male. In rare instances, maybe I'll go to 3. I think if you try to go much more than that, you start losing fertility and you start losing the willingness to breed. There's some individuals, particularly with some of the Mexicans, that I'm a little bit more confident that they can get that job done, but in general, they don't do that. But, when you have a large, and I know this will be another topic that we got coming up here, but when you have a larger breeding group, if you can use different males, then you can be offering unrelated pairs of babies rather than partially related pairs, and that helps with kind of keeping the genetic strength going for your babies. But that's kind of the cycle. And so to move it along, once you get a lockup, it does seem to be that one lockup is usually sufficient. It's pretty rare, to be honest with you. If I get a lockup, I'm going to get eggs in most cases, and that's maybe somewhat a product of just that I've whatever procedure and system I'm using is working. But once I get a lockup, I'm pretty confident I'm going to get eggs. I'll start feeding the female a little bit more heavily, and then a few months later, you'll get your clutch. So if I'm breeding in November, December, my clutches are generally happening around April. And clutch sizes also varies among the subspecies. In general, and again, this is all on average, Indigos and Easterns and Mexicans will have smaller clutch sizes than the Cribos. So they might have more like 6 to 12 eggs, whereas the Cribos might have more like 15 or 20. And then the egg size is also, follows suit. So, Texas Indigos and Eastern Indigos generally lay pretty large eggs. Mexicans a bit smaller. And that goes with sort of large eggs, small clutches, kind of a thing. Whereas the Cribos might pop out 20 eggs. They're smaller eggs and they're smaller babies. So that's generally happening around April. I guess I'll go straight into incubation.
Before you go to there, I want to make sure I'm understanding. So once you've cooled down, a little bit to the temps that you mentioned earlier, you put them together, you get your lock. You don't have a real brumation after that. Is that right?
I'll still keep it cooler. I'll still continue that cooler weather cycle. So they might lock up around Thanksgiving or something. I still am not raising the temperatures again until February or so.
And are you feeding during that time with the temperatures lower?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's significantly smaller meals, and it's less frequent. So rather than doing a rat and a chick every week, every 5 to 7 days, now I'm doing, maybe a chick once every 10 days or a small rat once every 2 weeks, something like that. I'm still offering food. That being said, I will say at least half of them don't want to eat anyway.
Gotcha.
And I'm generally, listen, if they want to eat, I'll feed them. And if they don't want to eat, I don't. I just make sure that the meal size and the meal frequency is something that they can pass given the temperatures that I've got them at. If I have the Easterns outside and it's 50 degrees, I'm not feeding them anything.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
Anyway, so if we're good with that, you ready for incubation?
Yeah.
Yep.
That works.
Okay. Incubation is absolutely one of the trickier things because there are some differences between incubating your average Colubrid and Dromarchon. So for starters, you got to be cooler. I think in general, you're talking corn snakes or whatever, you're looking at 80, 82 degrees, and that's sort of standard for a lot of Colubrids. If you're incubating indigos and cribos like that, you're a lot more prone for kinking. At higher temperatures, you will get more kinks. So what I prefer is more in the mid 70s. I set my incubator at 76 degrees. I lock it in. It doesn't change. 76 degrees, and they do really well with that. So that's absolutely a key. The other thing is, and I don't know the science behind it, but indigo eggs are different than other colubrids. First off, they have a texture. It's like sandpaper. It's not the smooth, leathery eggs that you would expect from other colubrids. It's a rough feeling egg, and your first thought is, oh man, that must hurt like hell when it's coming out of the female. But when I've caught them in my hand right as they're laying them at times, and they're soft, sort of gelatinous, gooey kind of mass when they come out of the female, and literally within minutes, once they hit that oxygen, the eggs start breathing, and they very quickly, within a few minutes, they harden, and they get that rough exterior, and they get that texture, and they fill out, to where they're not soft and mushy to the touch. So it's a really kind of a bizarre phenomenon. But anyway, but I think there's something to learn from that too, because when you're incubating them, they are more sensitive to air and temperature. I'm sorry, not temperature. More sensitive to air and humidity than other colubrid eggs. So for me, one of the things that are really neglected is whatever substrate you're using should be drier than other egg boxes that you would use. Now, despite being kind of a data guy, I don't have data on this. It's for me, it's a feel thing. I had it described to me when I was first starting out with Hondurans. Take your vermiculite, soak it with water, grab a handful, squeeze it and wring it out so every drop of water you can get out of it is out of there, and then that's what you use for your eggs, and that tends to work well on king snakes and corn snakes. That's way too wet for an indigo. And what'll happen if you're incubating with wetter substrate like that is that they will absorb some of that liquid and they'll swell. And in some cases, it'll swell enough to where the baby's malformed. You'll have defects. You'll have kinks.
Yeah.
And in extreme cases, they can swell enough to where the egg actually bursts, that they'll actually split open because they've absorbed so much of that humidity. So it's key to not let them have too much humidity. So what I will do is I'll almost barely moisten the vermiculite. And I use vermiculite. I've used perlite before. And I know other people use kind of more of the Sims method where they, put the egg on the egg crate type material, and then you've got the floating water down below. You can be successful in any of those scenarios, but it just in general, it has to be drier than what you would do with other snakes. So I'll just barely moisten the vermiculite. I'll put the eggs on top of it. I'll set it at 76 degrees, and I'm a lot more likely to be successful with that kind of setup. What I will do, though, is I'll add ambient humidity to my incubator. So I've got one of those big freestanding incubators, and I'll put a big tub of water down at the bottom of the whole incubator.
Yep.
And I would rather have humidity in the incubator instead of in the egg box itself.
That makes sense.
And that seems to work well for me. The other variable that I think is the hardest to measure and is the most neglected is airflow. They need airflow, and particularly towards the tail end of the incubation period. But they will actually breathe, these eggs. And again, I don't understand the science behind it, and they have pores or how they're different than other eggs. It's just something I've noticed with my observations, that if you, for example, if you set them up in a shoebox container, and if you fill the vermiculite, 3/4 or 7/8 up the way up to the top, you put the eggs in there, you put the lid on. If there's not much space between the egg and the lid, that's not enough air. And what'll happen is you'll get defects, for sure.
Oh.
And they have to be able to breathe. So what I'll do is first off, I'll use bigger egg tubs. I'll use more of a tote that has some height to it rather than a shoebox. And I'll put, instead of, 4, 5, 6 inches of vermiculite, I might do more like 2 or 3. And I'll leave a good 4 or 5 inches of space between the egg and the lid, and to allow more air inside of the egg box. And that's a lot better. I will also poke holes in my egg boxes to allow air to come in and out of the egg box, with the understanding that there's humidity in my incubator. So, a lot of people worry and say, what are you, crazy? You're putting holes in your egg box. You're going to lose all your humidity. But if the humidity is in the incubator, you're in a lot better shape there. So that's, I think, something, and I don't know how it would transfer to other species. I'm just not experienced enough with other types of colubrids. But in general, one of the things that I think we really have to talk about with Drymarchon specifically is airflow. They've got to be able to breathe. And if you don't provide that, you're not going to be happy with your results.
Damn.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get a little too afraid of the humidity piece, and they lose the oxygen, to your point.
Yeah.
For me, one of the things that I do at least once a week, I open every tub that's in the incubator.
Yeah.
Every one of them. I let that stagnant air out, let fresh air in, and I even have, at least one air hole on each side just for that small amount of ventilation. But I want to air it out. I just want to get the stagnant air out, and because I think that you're going to have that initial rush of humidity that leaves by opening that lid, but you close that lid, put it back in, it's going to build the humidity right back up because of the dampness that's already in the substrate.
Right.
So
yeah,
I think that airflow is. We've talked about that. Even in caging, on this, I think that that's a piece that we too often sacrifice because of humidity. We're told that it needs humidity. It also needs oxygen, and clean oxygen. So, good point.
Yeah, and even when you're talking in cages, and this is not necessarily relevant to Drymarchon, or at least with the way I keep them, that you'll hear people say, you want humidity in the air, you don't want the substrate wet.
Right.
Because that's when you start talking about bacteria, and you start talking about all that mold and all that other kind of stuff that you don't want, And I think it's relevant to eggs as well.
Yeah,
so
agree.
When you're incubating the eggs, these are going into an incubator. You're not doing put them up on a shelf because it's 77 degrees ambient in your room?
I'll tell you, over the years, I've tried everything. And I will say also that there were... one of the things that my partner and I were kind of doing differently, which was kind of cool, was that he has water turtles in his snake room, and so there's way more humidity ambient in his snake room than in mine. And what that has, and so what he was doing with his eggs is he was putting his eggs up in a cabinet because he had the humidity that he needed in that room, and you're keeping your indigos in the mid to upper 70s anyway, and if the temperature's right, and the humidity was there for the turtles. He was having a lot of success with that. I've since won him over to my way of doing things, and he's doing things in an incubator now because it's just a little bit more precise and a little bit less fluctuation, and lowers the risk of some kind of anomaly wrecking things for you. But it's important. So I've tried a lot of different things, but ultimately I've landed where I'm at now.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I think one of the pieces that I wanted to make sure that we got to touch base on, as well, because I think we've got incubation now. We're through the breeding and that piece. The legalities, because I know that with Eastern Indigos, there's some hoops to jump through to get a hold of these and to be able to own those. So can we touch base on that? And is there any more than just the Easterns that we have any legal issues with?
Right. So the only restrictions are with Eastern Indigos. There was a period of time, which has changed recently, where Texas Indigos were just protected from being collected in the wild. That has since changed. The state of Texas has changed their stance on that, and you can now take some with a hunting license. But that being said, as far as commerce goes, the only restriction is with Eastern Indigos. Okay, so they are federally protected, and the way in general, if I really oversimplify wildlife laws, the way in general it works is that the feds can't tell you what you can own or not own. What they can do is they can tell you what you move across state lines, interstate commerce. So you don't need a permit to own one. You can own one, and you're totally cool. But where the issues come in is if you try to move them across state lines when commerce is involved. So if I have a buyer who's outside of California, that buyer needs to obtain a federal interstate commerce permit in order to get that done. And what that permit allows you to do is it allows you to move the snake across state lines. And once the snake moves across state lines, then the permit's done with. It's over, it's expired, and you're good to go. So that's the way that the federal government restricts the commerce of Eastern Indigo snakes. Now, that being said, the responsibility for dictating what you can own or not own is on the states, individual states. So in some states, you're not allowed to keep indigos. In most states, you are allowed to keep indigos. So if you're interested in owning an Eastern Indigo snake, here's what you need to know. You have to know, first, are you allowed to keep them in your state? And second, if you buy them from a breeder within your state, you're good. You don't need a permit. You don't need anything. But if you're going to buy one from a breeder outside of your state, you need to get the federal interstate commerce permit to allow shipment across state lines. If you own an Eastern Indigo snake and you move, if I pick up and want to move to West Virginia tomorrow, I don't need a permit because there's no commerce involved. As long as there's commerce, you need the permit.
So if you were to donate them to Zach, would that require a permit?
It will not.
Nice.
It will not. Nice. Now, obviously, some people will try to use that as kind of a way to wiggle around, selling snakes and whatever, I'll give you some snakes and you give me back, but, the intent of the law is to say there should be no compensation. So what I will do if I'm donating a snake is I'll include a letter with the snake saying, listen, this snake is being donated to so-and-so. No compensation whatsoever has been given. And I'll have a donation letter that'll work like that. But anytime there's compensation, whether it's a trade or whatever it is, if there's compensation across state lines, you have to get a permit.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. So we're pushing 2 hours, but if it's okay, I want to jump on the inbreeding question because I know that's a hot button topic, and I would love to have that discussion here. So,
sure.
If anybody's into dry marking, a couple of the species, and I'm a little bit ignorant to this, but I can definitely speak to. I've lived it with black-tailed Cribos. That there's definitely this idea of some of these captive populations due to legalities of importation. In the case of Eastern Indigos, they're federally protected, so we're not going to be getting any more anytime soon. And I personally, as a conservationist, don't see a problem in that. But you definitely have to keep track of lineages and breeding, because if you do a lot of sibling to sibling breeding, this is definitely a genus where you can't really get away with the inbreeding too much, or maybe you can, but you definitely end up seeing the physical manifestations of inbreeding in this group of snakes. And I was a bit ignorant to that when I was putting together our collection here at the uni, and I felt like I was purchasing blacktail after blacktail after blacktail, and kept getting what equated to highly inbred snakes. So, so I don't know if you want to speak to just what an inbred Drymarchin looks like, because they definitely have a distinct appearance. What happens? Your thoughts on it? Just kind of go,
for sure. Yeah, well, you're 100% correct. Inbreeding is more of an issue with Drymarchin than other snakes. And I know it, pops up with certain morphs of other snakes and things, but Drymarchin are more particularly sensitive to that you're more likely to get defective animals the more you inbreed. And that's definitely a thing. Now, as far as what does an inbred snake look like, that can be the challenging part, and that's where we do get a lot of disagreement within the community of what that looks like. The obvious ones are what you've experienced, and that's where they'll get to be more of a dwarf. The snake will get to be about 4 feet long and then stop growing long and start growing fat. And they get this sort of short and dumpy look, and that's an issue. The second issue is that they can sometimes develop an enlarged heart, and it usually happens around 1 to 2 years old, 3-4 feet long or whatever it may be, and it's generally fatal. And so that's obviously a bummer if you purchase a snake and you think you're in good shape, and next thing you know, 2 years later, your snake rolls on you because it has an enlarged heart, and you can actually see the bulge, in the snake, that it can get that large. So, those are the health risks that you have with inbred snakes. Never mind, that when and if you do start breeding them, that you're more likely to be producing animals with defects, that'll grow up to be runts and whatever. It can be a challenge in that, a lot of the time, these snakes that grow to be dwarfish or have an enlarged heart, they're visibly fine when they're a baby. So it can be difficult for you to ascertain what you've got going on there. And it sounds like, Zach, you've experienced that, that you stick, and next thing you know, 2 years later, it's clearly something's off here. So it is important to make sure that when you're breeding, that we all have, a professional responsibility to make sure that we are outcrossing and avoiding inbreeding as much as possible when you're breeding Drymarchin. So if you have intentions to breed, I would absolutely make sure that you're either talking with the breeder, or that you're comprising your pair of 2 different breeders, or whatever it may be. Get as much lineage information as you can to make sure that your snakes are as unrelated as possible. Now, obviously, that can be a challenge when you're talking about Eastern Indigo snakes, because the gene pool in the pet trade has been limited for as many years as they've become protected. And again, from a conservation standpoint, rightly so. So it is something that you have to be mindful of. It's something that I'm mindful of. What I will generally do when I'm choosing my holdbacks, or when I'm choosing snakes to pair, is I look at the product. When my baby snakes are big and strong and robust, I'm doing something right. And when my babies are seem a little weak or a little lethargic, or maybe they're smaller, or the fertility in my clutches is low and I can't explain why. I avoid those pairings, and I'll either, if I can isolate it, pinpoint it to a certain breeder, that breeder's got to go live with somebody else. I did that with Eastern Indigos for many years, where I have spreadsheets of data where I kept track of fertility rates and defect rates and which males I'm pairing with which females and so forth. And I had a big enough of a group that I was able to kind of mix and match certain males with females. And I would say, I'm not interested in breeding snakes that have more red or more black or whatever. I'm perfectly happy to breed an indigo with a red throat to one that's all black, because what I want to see are big, thick, robust babies. So I did that for a long time. And slowly over the years, I weeded out the animals that I felt like were weaker or were producing weaker offspring. And then I finally did. There was a few years ago, a guy came out that had developed a DNA test that kind of gave you a little, somewhat imperfect snapshot of a snake's genetic strength. And so finally, after years, I broke down and said, more data is never a bad thing. And so I sent off shed skins to get them all tested. And, lo and behold, after a decade of sort of fine-tuning my breeding group, they came back as pretty genetically strong, relatively speaking. And so that's worked. And I'm working with Benson Morrell on furthering and getting a little bit more accurate testing with all that kind of thing for Eastern Indigos. We're in the process of that now, so hopefully we can get some good things going with that. But it is definitely a concern. When you talk about blacktails, the other thing that's happened in the last 5 years or so, I would say, is that you're starting, as the demand for Drymarchon has increased, you're starting to see a lot more imported from Nicaragua and from Central America. And for example, this year I have a few clutches where I bred some of my classic pet trade blacktail Cribos to a wild-caught animal. Nice. And the babies are coming out great. So it's absolutely something that needs to be mindful of, that people need to be mindful of. And if you have intentions of breeding, you should take care to make sure that the lineages as best you can, that you have whatever info you can, and that you're avoiding, related breedings as much as possible.
All right. Damn, that was So that's Drymarchon. How about we go to our final question, Clint? Does that sound cool?
Shoot, guys, I think I lost you again. I can't hear you anymore.
Uh-oh. I think you scared him.
Yeah. All right.
Should I jump off and come back on? I know we're getting close to the end of our time. Let me do it real quick. Seemed to work last time. Let's try it again.
Yep. Yeah, well, any of our listeners that want to Drymarchon, you're welcome.
Absolutely. I mean, this one's been packed with some information. I mean, I was super excited for it because it's a species I've never worked with, or any of the subspecies there.
Yep. So, I'm back and I can hear you. Thanks, guys.
All right, good deal.
Yeah. All right. So our final question that we ask everybody,
yes,
the great legacy of Matt Most, is what are your thoughts on herpetoculture in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you gloom and doom it? Do you think this is like a renaissance period and we're going to, kind of go into great pastures? I mean, Clint did a great job with the market report talking about how, the state of colubrids versus everybody else, at least numerically and statistically. So just what's your perspective on all this do you still have the demand for Drymarchon that you did 5-10 years ago?
Well, here's my market report. For the last 15-20 years, the demand for Drymarchon was essentially unlimited. I mean, it was crazy. And this year it's definitely slowed. But remember also, it is kind of a niche because it's a higher value, more expensive snake, and it's not for everybody. But that being said, it does seem to have slowed. But that being said, I think as far as herpetoculture in general, I think we're moving in a great direction. And I think a lot of it is that there's more information. There's more to learn. There are more guys like you guys that are facilitating discussions about, how cool things are, but also how to do things right and how to breed things and how to take care of things correctly and how to make the animals happy and all those things. So I think in general, we're moving in the right direction. So I'm excited about the next decade.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. This was great. Well, we'll have to have you on in the future to talk South American colubrids.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's funny how, after 2 hours, there are still things unsaid.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we could probably get a whole nother episode in on still Charmarcon. There are lots to talk about, but I'd love to come on and talk Moosserana and Barons Racers and all that kind of stuff too. I got to finish your book. I'm only about halfway through.
Oh, there we go.
Well, and I'll tell you, one of the things that we've kind of tossed around is, for some of these species and everything like you just mentioned, having maybe a potential roundtable, having a few guests on at the same time and getting to talk about, different experiences with some of the same species. And I think that's going to be a fun piece to do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So if people are interested in a Indigo or Cribo and they want to kind of look at what you've got, or just reach out for information, go to the website, go to social media and find you. How do you recommend people?
I mean, listen, my general strategy from day one has been, let's get people funneled through my website. So you want to start there. It's www.blackpearlreptiles.com. I tried to make it a place that's information friendly, that's photo friendly, that's educational as well as for commerce. So you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Instagram, but in general, even those social media outlets are meant to drive people through the website so they can learn about this stuff before they decide to go any further along the purchasing process. I'm too old to understand or get the TikTok thing or whatever else. Even my YouTube stuff is pretty pathetic, but the website's the best place to get a hold of me. You can email me through the website.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you. We'll definitely have you on again if you're willing to come back on. We got plenty to talk about.
Hey, man, I had a great time. This was a lot of fun. I'll come on anytime you guys will have me.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
So,
super cool.
Those who want to get a hold of me, Zach Loafman on Facebook, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, and then potential grad students, reach out. We didn't even get to talk about OCIC. I've had a graduate student work on making a sausage diet for indigos that's more equivalent to a cold-blooded ectothermic prey item. So we can definitely talk about all that. But we are actually currently forming a relationship with Central Florida Zoo, and the goal is to have graduate students working with indigo snakes because they're so freaking awesome. You don't have to twist my arm twice to work with indigo snakes. So if you're interested in that, you made it to this point, and you're nerding out and you want to go to grad school, hit me up. We also want to thank NPR Network for having us. We love being part of the network. We work with Eric pretty much weekly. That man is a saint. We asked him 2-3 weeks ago, trying to lighten his workload, if there was anything we could do to help upload the episodes. And then the process he goes through after we record this, I think Clint and I both saw what he said, and we're like, yeah. And no, we just figured out how to freaking add an admin to a Facebook page. So that's me. Where can people find you, Clint?
You can find me on Facebook, my personal Clint Bartley, or under the Metazotics business page. We're Metazotics LLC on Instagram, or you can always email us at metazotics@gmail.com. And, of course, you can find Zach and I both at Colubrid and Colubroid Radio on Facebook. So please shoot us messages there.
Yes. So with that being said, whatever time of day, night, morning it is, hope you're having a good one. Later. Hey, this is Zach.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exoterra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exoterra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with, both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exoterra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top-quality terrariums, Exoterra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exoterra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.